Forward. Perhaps the first thing to understand about addictive personalities is that most of these mindsets are unable to see the bigger picture in any scenario, and everything for them is either one or the other option, and there is no room for compromising. This very destructive personality trait eventually causes a lot of problems both socially and personally for the individual. Therefore, learning to overcome this would eventually prove to be an advantage. Get all the info you need here. An Addict's Guide to Freedom. New ways to understand addicts and get rid of addictions. 5- Chapter 1. Addictive Personalities. Synopsis. The following are some characteristics that are seemingly prevalent in addictive personalities, and identifying and understanding these would be the first step towards eliminating them from the personality makeup. 6- The basics. Poor coping skills. This is almost always a trigger factor for the addictive personality to withdraw or take a defensive stand in any situation. Not being able to accept change or cope with it is usually what causes the individual to shun from the prevailing circumstances and shut themselves out from having to face the problem at hand. The need for immediate gratification, the need to buffer or shield oneself from any adverse situations or feelings would require the quick fix action that usually includes substance abuse, alcohol, of turning to other equally negative distractions. Such relief is only temporary and ineffective, as the individual is not really dealing with the situation, and instead choosing to shut it out by replacing it with a temporal good feeling aura. This, of course, is not only an unproductive recourse, but also one that will eventually bring forth further negative complications. Addictive personalities also usually seek ways to numb themselves from rejection, or go all out to seek approval at every juncture. The substance abuse gives them the perception of either of these options unfolding, thus satisfying them temporarily. This form of perceived protections is how addictive personalities are able to function within society comfortably. 7- Chapter 2. How people get trapped in addiction. Synopsis. There are several reasons how an individual is sucked into the addiction trap, and most are not really ever aware of the process until it becomes too late to pull out. Understating some of these contributing elements might help an individual to avoid being pulled into the negative platform. The following are some of the possible reasons an individual ends up being trapped into an addiction. 8- What happens? Having a negative self-image is usually a prevailing factor that is the ideal platform for the individual to seek out some form of addiction. This addiction is perceived by the individual to give him or her some form of confidence and comfort which enable them to seemingly cope with dealing with the outside world. Elements such as rigidity and tensions are better handled with the presence of the addictive element in their lives. A distorted self-image is also another possible reason people seek addictions, or why addictions seem to provide the realism in their lives. Functioning within the distorted frame can then seem easy and acceptable, as the substance abuse provides the escape for the individual. Deeper self-intoxication is another negative prevailing occurrence when an individual chooses to be addicted to anything in particular. This phase requires the individual to indulge in this addiction, without which the said individual would be unable to function with any sense of normality. The chemical changes brought on by the addiction is very destructive to the overall well-being of the individual, but at the same time the individual is unable to break the hold the addiction has, because of the comfort element it provides. 9- There are also those who start out experimenting on these substances only to find that this eventually leads to a dangerous and negative state. Wanting to fit in and be accepted is the launching pad for most. 10- Chapter 3. In the mind of an addict. Synopsis. The mind of an addict can be rather confusing and destructive, as they often perceive things different from the normal mind, thus imagining and focusing on the unreality of everything from encounters to food to the environment, and many others. It is not uncommon for people to perceive addicts as having split personalities, as they almost always seem to be unable to function in the real world with real rules and expectations. When the pressure is on, most addicts turn to the dependence of other almost always unhealthy sources for the added ability and confidence to function. However, addiction is a treatable condition if the individual has the drive and commitment to seek out a suitable solution or treatment and stick to it for the long haul. 11- Have a look. Addiction is a chronic and progressing disease, like any other, and it takes its toll on the body and mind of the sufferer. However, with the addict, the willingness to treat the negative condition lies very much with the individual's willingness to admit there is a problem, and this is where the problem lies. Most addicts are very clear in their mind that the problem is not with them but with the rest of the world, and getting those to dispel this thought process is very challenging, to say the least. In most cases, this is only achieved through intervention, or when something terrible happens that requires drastic changes to be made. The areas that need intense therapy and attention is the mind of the addict, as this is the main engine that can dictate the success or the failure of any attempt to be treated of the disease. Focusing on the mind and getting it to a safe plateau will help increase the chances of a successful recovery. 12- Chapter 4. Taking responsibility for your life. Synopsis. Taking responsibility for one's life, decisions made, actions carried out, and the consequences is among the important actions that should be seriously considered by addicts who is trying to make changes for the better. Starting at this point would help the addict individual better define the reason for his or her existence and work with whatever is available. 13- Responsibility. Taking responsibility can be a very overwhelming and frightening prospect for the addict, and the support of family and friends would be very much needed, and certainly an advantage to have if any level of success is to be achieved. With the help of others, the addict is better able to focus and keep steadfast in the quest towards complete recovery. Some of the areas that should be explored and examined very carefully would include those listed below. The addicts would have to seriously address these areas with complete honesty and perseverance for success to be achieved. The following are the areas listed. Acknowledging the problem, which is the addiction, is the first step that should be clearly established in the mind of the addict. When this has been firmly established, then only can the relevant processes toward recovery be identified and implemented. Another important and often beneficial exercise to explore would be for the addict to acknowledge the damaged phase of the addiction and the things that took place while the addict was in the troughs of the addiction. Also to be examined should be the detrimental effect this phase had on the life of the addict at that time. 14- When the addict is firm in the decision to seek a complete change, the road to recovery should be acknowledged as going to be tough and an uphill battle. This to ensure the addict's mind is fully prepared for the onslaught both on the body and mind he or she is about to endure. Then the choice is still available, and the journey towards the new life can begin. 15- Chapter 5. Replacing addiction with new habits. Synopsis. One of the very real challenges most recovering addicts have is to face not knowing what to do with all the time they now have on their hands. Previously, this time or void would be filled with indulging in the addictive habit, and now that the effort is made to no longer indulge in the addictive habit, the individual is lost and unable to decide what to do to occupy the time slot. This needs to be addressed with some sense of urgency, so that the addict does not fall back into the addiction simply out of boredom. The following are some ideas of what the addict should consider as an alternative to filling the void created by the exemption from the addictive habit. 16- Changing it. Taking up a hobby is almost always the first recommendation most people would suggest to the recovering addict. However, this should be encouraged only if the relevant support is available to keep the addict focused and committed to the hobby. Ensuring that the choice of the hobby is not too challenging and frustrating is also another consideration that is equally important, as such negative feelings may end up pushing the addict back to the addiction, where he or she perceives that they will find solace and comfort. Other alternative may include a change of surrounding and environment. Removing the addict from the comforts and easy access to the addiction will allow the proper adjustment to take hold in the addict's life. Coupling this with activities that take up a large part of their time is also important, as it is ensuring the activity is both productive and enthusiastically received. Meditation is also another area to explore when the individual is seeking new habit to focus on. The meditative state of mind can help to calm the body, as it does the mind, and allow the addict to properly accept and simulate into the new beginning. 17- Chapter 6. Motivation to freedom. Synopsis. Getting out of the addiction state requires the cooperation of both the body and the mind of the individual. This is often hard to accomplish if there is no motivational and inspiring platform to look towards in the quest to start the journey to beat the habit. Therefore, having some form of motivational tools that inspire freedom will definitely help the addict take the first step towards recovery. The following are some areas that can be explored to inspire motivation to inspire freedom from the addiction. 18. Get motivated. Trying to understand the problem that is encouraging the individual towards the habit that is likely to ensure the individual stays an addict is one way of finding the motivation factor that will eventually help free them from the addiction. When this has been identified, other possible healthier alternatives can be suggested to help steer the individual towards the freedom that they originally perceived to be enjoyed by the addiction. Sometimes making the addict aware of the damage that is being caused by the addiction upon themselves and their loved ones will be a good eye-opener and motivational tool that can steer them away from the addiction. This is especially true if the addict is able to clearly see the damage that is being done due to the addiction. The willingness to be totally committed to help is also a good motivating factor that will encourage an addict to try and kick the habit. Often it would seem easier for the addict to continue down the road to destruction because the much-needed help is not totally and unconditionally available. Thus, in assuring the addict of this level of commitment on the part of those willing to help, the addict is more likely to be motivated to seek freedom from the addiction based on the surety of the outside help extended. 19. Wrapping up. Addiction is not necessarily only directed or categorized as substance abuse, is one way of identifying possible platforms which can be construed as being destructive enough to be addictive. When this identification phase is completed, the relevant counseling approaches can be designed to help the individual get out of the addictive state. Any form of compulsive, repeated behavior often falls into the addictive phase or category. Therefore, it would be essential for the individual to identify this characteristic so that the counseling sought would be specifically designed to focus on the problem and design a corresponding solution that will not frustrate the addict. Counseling also helps the addict get the kind of assistance that is experienced enough to ensure successive results on a higher percentage. Seeking counseling to eradicate the addiction is sometimes the only way to finally be completely rid of the addiction. Counseling helps the addict both mentally and physically to face the problem, and because most counseling sessions are done by experienced personnel, the advice and assistance given would not be done so on a random scale, but rather in most cases, it would be tailored to suit the needs and concerns of the addict in question. 20. Counseling sessions will usually seek to identify the root of the problem that is contributing to the necessity to seek solace in the addiction rather than just treating the addiction with medications and therapy. This makes the counseling sessions very important and instrumental in the recovery of the addict. Counseling sessions also teach the addict to seek other positive and healthy alternatives to distract from reverting back to the addiction. Teaching methods of overcoming the negative urges and encouraging the addict to leave the old lifestyle and environment behind is the basis for most counseling sessions.